Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday, and welcome to this month's Legacy Project webinar. I'm Dan Scott, and Chad Reyes and Rich Orlando will be joining us today on the call. For those who are new to the Legacy Project, we are formed as a movement intended to accomplish really three things: community, conversation, and collaboration, and to usher in a new era of estate and wealth advisory, which focuses more on a holistic, legacy-minded approach. The community, again, intended to gather a community of like-minded, legacy-minded professionals like yourselves and ourselves to have an ongoing conversation and dialogue about industry practices and how collectively we can come up with new standards and best practices around legacy planning. And then collaboration to instill in all of us the ethic of collaborating with our colleagues and taking a team approach to advising clients. So without further ado, I would like to welcome in Chad Reyes and Dr. Rich Orlando for today's discussion.
Thanks, Dan. Dan, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you guys for being with us today. Like Dan just said, the Legacy Project is all about those three C's: community, conversation, and collaboration. And today we're glad to have Richard Orlando with us. Just to share a little bit of housekeeping before we get started is Dan Scott is going to be joining us at the end, and he's going to be sharing about his perspective from the legal lens on our conversation today. So we're going to have the conversation, Rich and I, and then Dan's going to join us at the end and really give us a nice perspective of those questions and how it applies. So excited to be with you. Many of you that are on this call are from many different parts of the country. So just excited that we have so much different turnout from different parts of the nation. Couple of things. If you were on our previous Legacy Project conversation last month, you obviously know that we had Dr. Richard Orlando, who's a close friend of ours, an industry thought leader, and we started with 5 questions. 5 questions that every family, every advisor are typically thinking about when it comes to legacy. So I'd encourage you to go back to our YouTube channel to listen in to that conversation last month. That was the June 25th conversation. Today's conversation is just going to be a continuation of that. So for those of you that are on, we're excited to have you with us. The way we're going to design today is going to be a little bit different. As many of you know, this is a movement that we're looking to continue these conversations around legacy. And today we have 4 out of the 5 questions that we're going to be going over. And those 4 out of those 5 questions, we're going to allocate approximately about 15 minutes or so to each question. Richard and I are going to have about 5 minutes or so to have a conversation around that. And then we're going to open up the dialogue to anyone who has questions that's on today's conversation. So Richard, maybe for those that were not on last month's go to webinar conversation, could you just give a little bit of background about yourself, a little bit about what you've been doing in this legacy planning space, and then we'll jump right into those 4 out of 5 questions that you speak about, that how important they are to families, and these are the questions that they're asking themselves.
Sure. And Dan and Chad, thanks for having me back. And for those who might be wondering, that's not the color of my wall. That is actually a green screen behind me. I'm in my home studio office. So no virtual background, just a pure green screen. So quick recap, and to your point, Chad. So the short version of how I got here and why we're chatting together is I was fortunate to work inside of major financial institutions for a combination of 20 years. First with Drexel Burnham, which was a major investment banking firm back in the 80s. And then for about I was with them for about 5 years, and then and then Merrill Lynch private bank for about 15 years. While I was never on the side of investing or being a technical pro, but in some capacity I was training, coaching, or consulting the advisor world who was supporting was working directly with the families of wealth. While I did all of that work, I also was able to accumulate a couple of degrees. So I have a master's in counseling and a PhD in family psychology. And I did my dissertation on family wealth management teams. In other words, those financial advisor firms that have family members working in it, husband, wife, father, son, whatever the combinations were. So I really blended the family business world with the wealth management world. And because of that, Merrill Lynch said, why aren't you serving our clients directly alongside the advisor? So I was very fortunate, and it's now approximately 20 years ago that that process started. I went from working alongside and coaching and training advisors who were supporting those clients and serving those clients to now coming alongside them and helping them serve their clients totally on the legacy side or the qualitative side of planning. And I was very fortunate that that happened. And anyway, about 10 years ago, I made a decision to leave Merrill Lynch. I wrote a book called Legacy, which we're speaking about today. And Chad, if you want to remind everybody, those who ask questions will get a complimentary ebook by you guys afterwards. But I wrote that book as based on my experience of working, having a great appreciation and respect for what the advisor does in serving their clients. And for the sake of our conversation, I'm using advisor as any professional that's client facing, whether you bring various expertise or whether you're a planner or a tax attorney, a wealth manager, a family office executive, whoever you might be, that's who we're speaking about today in a broader sense. And so my book was really focused based on those roughly 20 plus years of experience of the advisor and the family. How do I help advance the ball on legacy? And I'll segue from that to this conversation. In our last call, for those who weren't on it, we spent a good amount of time helping frame or reframe what does it mean, what's the word legacy mean, and what is legacy planning? What does that mean? And I'll very quickly, before we get to the next questions to discuss today, and I want to, I'd say big picture, how we talk about it, what we think is more valuable to clients and the advisors serving them, is to go beyond the what I'll call the foundational or traditional definition of legacy or legacy planning, usually meaning what does a person, an individual or a family leave behind? And the planning side of that definition is, let's do some end of life planning. Where do you want your assets to go? Who owns them? How are we going to protect them? So what we said during our last call is that is foundational and that's important, and I've done it for my family. But if you stop there, you've really limited the value that you could bring to your clients as advisors. And we talked, and Dan, for example, said he framed it as we're moving from death and taxes planning to life and purpose planning. I talk about it in saying that really once you do kind of the end of life planning, legacy or whatever you're going to call it, you're really there to help your clients accomplish what they want in life and help them create experiences for their heirs, if that's part of their planning, because that's really where the value in the life is lived. Once someone passes, their legacies are kind of in stone or in writing, so to speak. So that's what we talked about the last time, and we began the conversation on what are the 5 questions the book Legacy is addressing. And we talked about the first question, which was, how do you create happiness in yourself and in those you love? And here we are today with 2, 3, and 4, and 5.
That's awesome. So Rich, before we get started, I want to share this. I had this conversation with a few other advisors, and we mentioned about the Legacy Project, and we spoke about how the Legacy Project has the 3 C's: community, collaboration, and conversation, right? One of the things that came up that was really, it was really helpful was to really think about this as advisors. Maybe at some point when we get back to some form of normality, or even virtually at some point, where you can take these conversations, bring them to your office, bring advisors around your table, and facilitate it and use this as a facilitation conversation so that you have the ability to provide value to them and eventually hopefully collaborate. And one of the things that the Legacy Project's goal is to eventually bring these conversations to your local community. So we're starting with a conversation with thought leaders and people similar that we can discuss what legacy means, but we really want to encourage you and give you tools to be able to bring it to your community. go back to the Legacy Project YouTube channel, play a recording, have some breakfast. Eventually, once we're able to do all of that, or you may be able to do that right now in your community, bring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 advisors around the table and have a conversation around this of how you can serve families through this lens. So I just want to encourage you, if you haven't thought about that, do that. Hit play, put them around the table, stop, pause, have a conversation. And Rich, I remember one time you and I doing this in our conference room in Staten Island when we first originally started the study group that we started with Dan and myself and you and some others. And we started that, and that was the impetus for it. And now it's kind of progressed into something more of a movement. But I would encourage you as advisors to do that. I think it would be something that would be really fulfilling, rewarding. It wouldn't take a lot of legwork or heavy lifting, and could provide value to other advisors that you work with in your network. So we're going to jump into those 4 questions. Rich, so the next question, this is question 2 out of 5. And those of you that are on, if you wanted to hear the response and conversation to the first question, you can go back to the YouTube channel. It's on there, the recording. But question 2 is, how do I transfer my wealth to my children and to those who I care about? And it's a question that I know you hear often, I hear often, many of us, Dan hears often. How are you able to put that in context when it comes to planning, legacy planning, estate planning? Share with me about it, and then I want to open up the line to any advisors that have questions. So if you have any questions and anything that Richard's saying, just raise your hand and our team will let us know, and we will open up your mic to have a conversation, because we're going to go like that. We're going to do it that way based on the 4 questions. So we'll have this question, we'll open up the mic. We'll have the next question, we'll open up the mic. So Rich, can you kind of share on that?
Yeah, let me start with a little anecdote, that maybe 1 or 2 real quick ones. So I remember a number of years back sitting with a matriarch, and it was I was introduced to her by another family branch, and she had meaningful wealth that she had inherited from a larger family business from a prior set of generations. And anyway, so in our discovery of getting to know her and how to figure out how we could be helpful, part of what we were understanding is who were her children, what were her goals, and she shared with us her estate planning intentions. Now, I want to be very clear, if it's not clear to those who are listening in, myself nor my firm Legacy Capitals does any kind of technical planning. We're not capable of it. It's not our mission. It's not our purpose. We're exclusively on the role of either complementing those who are dialed in here or working directly with the families. So this chapter on transferring wealth is we'll just call it a qualitative 5-step process. So anyway, I'm sitting with the matriarch, and she starts to describe her children who were adults, young adults. And she basically portrayed them as, solid citizens, but quite immature in terms of financial readiness, and even some challenges from a psychological perspective. They were having particular struggles as young people or adults. So she was portraying them in a way that caused me, as she described what the estate plan intentions were, which was basically in just a few set of years, they were about to inherit, not just receive income, inherit significant assets. And I use this as one example of, ultimately through that process, it was based on her goals, her values, and who her children were. If she ever put that amount of assets in her kids' lives at the ages that they were intending, they would not have been able to be good stewards of it. So she had to adapt her estate plan. One more example, and then I'm going to talk more specifically about some of the ideas in the chapter. This was just about a year or 2 ago. I'm sitting with the patriarch of a blended family. In his own biological family, he had a number of children, 4-ish, and then his new spouse brought in 2, and they were newer to the mix. So it was a blended family. And he was just outlining for me what he was intending to do with his estate. And he never thought about it, because he was just maybe in the spirit of what Dan talks about. Maybe the guidance he's gotten to date was only about death and taxes. And as he laid out his intentions, I just kind of did some calculating for him, saying, okay, if this is going here and this is going here, and you plan on giving this to your stepchildren, and maybe a foundation is going to get this, I put it on paper for him, and he never saw it this way, is he unintentionally was going to give a same amount or more assets to his new children in a way that's not what he wanted to have happen. And he had to adjust his plan, not because he didn't want, he was going to bless them very much, but he didn't have someone sitting with him going, okay, who's your family? What's important to you? What are you trying to accomplish? And it did not match his estate plan. Okay, those are two real stories that I just asked a few more questions. Don't have the technical knowledge that at least half the people on this call are going to have, because I'm asking different questions and I'm providing a different frame. And so in this chapter, there's 5 steps, but here's some of the key topics. This is a classic one that we're probably all familiar with on this call, is this question of, when I think about sharing or one day transferring wealth to others, the question of fairness versus equal emerges. Like, how do I do this? What's fair? What's equal? What if there's a business? Not everyone's in the business. In terms of my heirs or my other loved ones, maybe siblings.
Rich, I want to share that I think that as advisors, we have this obligation to ask really good questions to be able to get our clients to think. You know, part of being an advisor is getting your client to think through their decision-making process, right? And I think that's what you're getting to, is it's around, if you ask a good question, it allows them to really think like, wait, is that really what I wanted to do? Wait, maybe that's not what I really wanted to do. So asking great questions is so key.
Yeah,
So,
right, and this is not about becoming a psychologist or getting a PhD in family psychology. It's about asking some other questions and broadening the lens of your conversation. And it's transformational when advisors do that. So the chapter is meant to provide the advisor, really the family and the advisor, to think kind of about life and purpose. So what are we trying to accomplish? So on the fair and equal question, I provide some guidance there. But one of the things I talk about is, you could, if you think about it from a vertical and horizontal model, you could be equal, meaning that using the example of all children will get education covered. I'm just giving you the classic ones. Backed up health insurance if they need it, a down payment on a house, whatever they may be, or their grandchildren's education. So you could be equal on that. But that may not, but it might not be fair if you have one child who's maybe a single parent, whose grandchild or children have special needs, they don't make a lot of money, and another child, produces a lot, makes a lot of money, doesn't need the same amount. And so it's a great section on just wrestling through what does it mean to be fair versus equal.
Well, the thought is, and this is what I've seen over the years, and then that we have our Wealth and Legacy group, but then we also have a coaching company, a leadership coaching company. And what I've realized is this: I think people default to that because they don't know how to address the conversation, right? So like, if equal is so much better than me addressing some of the conflicts that I may have, but not realizing that if I don't address them, they're going to come up anyways at some point.
Yeah, and it may not even be, that's right. But it may not even be a conflict. It may be, like you said, the reflex reaction is, why wouldn't I give it equally? Right? That's where you start. And let's echo what you said a moment ago. Just asking a couple more questions, having a broader conversation, it's actually helping your client plan better anyway. And so that's a very important topic that commonly comes up in the planning process. Another one that I talk about is I take the literal concepts that's used in planning of gifting versus transferring. And I'm not, so the point of the chapter is I'm not using the literal definitions of what's a gift or estate plan, taxes or anything like that. So what I say is helping the wealth creator think about their estate planning or what they're going to share with others is how do they think about it from a gift or a transfer? And the way I mean by that is, if it's a gift, Mr. or Mrs. Matriarch or Patriarch, then that means no strings attached. It's as if you're giving them a birthday gift or a holiday gift. But if it's a transfer, that might be where you want to say, that's where you're going to put a little bit more guidance around how someone gets access to a corpus or an income from a trust. So helping them think that way kind of shifts, again, the idea of, no, I'm going to give this to my children just because I'm not going to have any strings attached. I'm not going to manage it from the grave. But in these set of assets, either because it's the nature of the asset themselves or the readiness of the children, there's going to be some guidance around it, and that's what I'm going to consider my transfer part. One other topic in this chapter that's very important, and I think is not discussed much, is what I call, or the industry calls, money beliefs or wealth narratives or wealth beliefs, and I give some questions on that in the chapter to help advisors. But that is just asking the grantors, what's your belief about money? Meaning, do you believe, some people believe that the more the merrier. Some people believe too much in a kid's hands will destroy them. Or they might have had an experience, like one of our clients did, it was a family business. In a prior generation, a family business blew up and hurt relationships. So they were hypersensitive, and now their generation and their children's generation on how to navigate a family business. So just asking those questions will help provide so much more insight to help those on this call guide their clients, provide the wisdom and the advice, and ultimately have a client whose planning is more effective in what they're trying to accomplish in their legacies.
Yeah. Rich, before we open up the mic, and we just, anyone who has any questions, you could type it in or raise your hand, and we'll be able to see if your hand is raised, and we'll open up your mic. What are some questions when it comes to transferring wealth from your years of being in this space? What is like 2 questions that can get an advisor, an attorney, a wealth manager, a CPA, family office, to be able to get their clients to think differently? Because John Maxwell says this all the time. He says that questions unlock potential, right?
Yeah.
So if we have questions that we can kind of tap into for advisors that are on this call, I think that would help them get deeper to the why behind what their clients are trying to accomplish. Your years of experience, what are 2 questions that you think that they can just incorporate into their practice?
If you would allow me, I have 2 specific what we call discovery questions, but for those who might be interested, forgive the plug, we do what we call whole family advisor training. It's a 4-module training for advisors, and one of the modules section focuses on 10 discovery questions to your point, Chad. So here's 2, not necessarily in any order, but one question that just quickly opens up the conversation is, what do you hope your wealth accomplishes in your life and in your subsequent generations? Fundamentally different question. Another question is, if tomorrow your children, your heirs, whoever they were going to receive their inheritance, what would be the impact on their lives? Those 2 questions fundamentally will give the client, if they haven't thought about it, and the advisor a gauge on where the planning is or could be or should be. Yeah. Those would just be 2. We have like 10, or I don't remember the exact numbers, but quite a few in our training to help advisors just unlock the potential, in quoting Maxwell there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd like to just put this out to everyone that's on the call. So if you have a specific question, one is we're gonna also give you a copy of Richard's book, Legacy, in an ebook. But if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'd love to open up your mic, specifically around this. How do I transfer my wealth to my children and those that I care about? And would love to engage you in this conversation, because part of this legacy project is not only just Richard sharing or Dan and I sharing, it's also hearing from those that are in the audience. And one thing I can tell you is that your perspective is so important, whether it's in agreement or not in agreement. It's really important because it helps open up a conversation around this. So I just would encourage anyone who has any questions to open up, to raise your hand, and we will open up your mic. Yep, I don't see anything right now, but Richard, you and we'll continue the conversation. When we see the hand raised, we'll open it. In regards to transferring wealth, right? You speak a lot about 5 capitals. I got the concept from you, the idea from you, and many years ago when we were dialoguing around it. What I'd like to talk about is specifically, when we talk about transferring wealth, you're not only talking about the financial aspect of it, you're talking about multiple other aspects of it. Can you kind of just share that? And then we have a person, Rhonda, whose hand is raised. So as soon as you're done doing that, I'm going to open up Rhonda's mic.
Yeah, so if those who dialed in don't know this yet, you did a call, I think with Dan a couple of calls back on the 5 capitals. But your question is, for those of you not maybe familiar with that, the acronym FISHES, it stands for Financial, Intellectual, Social, Human, and Spiritual Capital. And you're right, there's the financial capital part of planning, which is at the heart of it and foundational, but it's not the only capital. It's what other life lessons, what other values, what other teachings, vision, faith, whatever it might be, what else are we trying to move through the generations?
Yeah.
And that goes to the larger definition of why you're doing this legacy project, which is the idea of legacy is much broader than financial capital, as foundational as that is.
Yeah, you know, Rich, I the last 2 weeks, I think I shared with you, but John Maxwell's dad passed away on the 4th of July. He was 98 years old, but to your point, he's doing a 4-part lesson. He's 2 parts into it already, and there are 2 more parts the next 2 Mondays. And he's talking about the 29 lessons I learned from my dad, right?
Wow.
And I think about it, and I say that is a transfer of wealth. And how do we build that into our overall legacy planning side of it? But yeah, those 5 capitals are so important. It has impacted, you know, everything we do, and I appreciate you sharing that. We're gonna open up Rhonda, Rhonda's mic. Rhonda, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can't appreciate any more than all the good work you do. The point about questions unlock potential, and to share a story of my being in a workshop at the Heckerling Estate Planning Institute when I was a very young lawyer, when a prominent, nationally known figure asked this question: what do you do with the questionnaires that you send to your clients before your initial meeting? I was pretty young, pretty green, but I went to the mic and I raised my hand and I said, I leave them in the file to make certain my secretary spells the names correctly. And he knew exactly what I meant, which is put it away, dude, and start asking questions. You know, nothing could be worse than, oh, I see your name is Richard Orlando. Richard, I see you have 4 children. I literally don't use questionnaires in my interview because of that very reason. Just say, tell me about these kids of yours, and it's amazing what starts, right?
Game changer.
Yeah, game changer. You know, Rhonda, thank you for sharing that. And I think about it, John wrote a book called Leaders Ask Great Questions, and that is something that is so powerful because I've seen it in my own personal life and with the clients we work with. If you ask a question, it gets them to have to really think about that. Whereas if you just tell them, there's no thinking process. There's no thought process that goes into that because they either reject what you shared or they accept what you shared. But the questioning part of it, to your part of your process, is so key because you really get to engage with them. And I'm sure over the years, you've probably seen such a level of connection with the clients you work with because you're able to ask questions and hear where they're at, no?
I believe so. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. All right, let's see if we have anything else here. Rich, so Dan, you wanna jump in on that question? Because I know you have a question that you just sent over. Why don't you throw your webcam on and let's have that quick conversation with Richard.
Sure thing. Oh, there I am. Yeah, Rich, I mean, you talk about the different capitals, and I think that's really the cornerstone of legacy planning for everybody on this call is to start understanding and redefining what wealth is, right? from the legal perspective, right? I guess speaking to the lawyers and the estate planners on the phone here, an estate by definition is really your assets, right? And I guess some rights that you have to other assets. And so when we think of assets, we think really in terms of financial capital, right? We think of whether it's ownership of shares of a company or cash or those sorts of things. So when you start talking about the other capital, spiritual capital, social capital, human capital, and what's the other one I'm missing? Intellectual capital. Thank you. Can you discuss what the lawyers on the phone here should be considering in terms of how do we infuse that into a legal structure? How do we infuse that into a legal plan in terms of succession, protection, et cetera? And what are some of the vehicles or tools that you've used?
Yeah.
Yep. And Rich, before you just share that, I'm sorry. I just want to let the gentleman know, we have a gentleman, William, who has some questions. So we're going to open up his mic right after you're done, Richard. We'll open up William Hagan's line to ask his question particularly.
Yeah. One tactical way, which I think what you're asking me is in part, how do we practically translate this idea of other capitals into the planning itself? So one tool that maybe many of you are using, and if not, I think it absolutely helps go to those other capitals, is are you helping your clients create a letter of wishes that gets attached to the plans, right? As you know, it's not a legal document, but it can provide great guidance when there's trustees that have discretion or guardians. And the letter of wishes, maybe there's somebody on this call that doesn't know, but and Dan, feel free to fix what I say here. It's where you get a chance to say why the estate plan is what it is. It's the guidance, it's the color, it's the heart part of planning that will supplement the plan itself. That's a very tactical way to go broader than the asset protection kind of angle. Just two other examples. If you think about intellectual capital, that would mean kind of the knowledge that we have, the education that we get, the life experience we have. Well, if that's a driving value in the family and I'm the grantor and I want to help my subsequent generations invest in that, well, then that might be the guidance or the terms when someone can get access to the capital that I might put, the financial capital that I might put in a trust or trusts. Or I've also seen, let's take spiritual capital where it's the values and maybe even a specific faith. I've heard and I've seen people will say, if I marry someone in this religion, I have one trust. If I marry someone outside our family's religion, I have a different outcome in what happens to me from an estate planning perspective. That would be more of a punishment, but it also shows how that family is kind of guiding what they believe is important in terms of their values in that case. So you would translate those capitals into what outcomes you hope to have or teach, and then have the estate plan align with them.
Awesome.
Very important question.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. William Hagan, we're going to open up your line. William, you there?
While we're waiting for that, I just want to speak to it just from an investment perspective, right? Which is nothing new to anyone on this call. But if you think about the major trend that's unfolded of impact investing or ESG or whatever the categories are, that's so much more is speaking. They might not be using the language, fish or the acronyms of the other capitals, but that's what's happening there. We're moving beyond returns to conversations around what kind of impact. What's our family's value set? What's our company's value set? And factoring that into their investments as well.
Yep. William, if you want to share on the mic, you just have to unmute yourself on your end. If not, I'll ask your question. So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to unmute if you want to. If not, we'll ask you a question. All right. So Richard, his question is, I'm literally reading it. How do we reconcile legacy planning to do good with increasing public support for much higher taxes on wealth and wealth transfer to also do good? Will more clients focus on preserving wealth for their families instead?
I'd like Dan to weigh in on this because he actually, although he does more than just this, he's the trained estate planner. Boy, that's such a timely question in the world that we're in, and that sometimes the generational perspectives, how they could be very different. And I think that all the more raises the value of the advisors on this call in helping the family navigate that and have those conversations about where there is serious alignment and where there might be some alignment and where there's no alignment. And then how do they negotiate that? If that's what they're even open to doing, how do they negotiate that so that ultimately, let's speak from the perspective of the wealth creator or the wealth holder, that they want to have, assuming they want to have a positive impact of their legacies, their wealth in this case, how do they do that in a way that it doesn't blow up the next generation unintentionally? And I think that the question is so timely, obviously, to really helping be open as advisors to what you talked about earlier and we talked about on the prior call. This is about being a coach and a facilitator in addition to your technical expertise. It's not you being a psychologist. It's you helping them navigate the planning process by opening up these other conversations. Great question.
Yeah,
I don't know if Dan wants to weigh in on that.
I don't. I think it's probably a little too complicated to weigh in on. I have a lot to say on the matter. Maybe later.
You know, Rich, I will say this, that I think when it comes to doing good, or some people call it charitable planning or philanthropy planning, right? I think as advisors, we have to take a role to understand what the heart of the matter is. And I say this a lot, and I'm saying this for the advisors on the call because I think it's so important. It was something that, 15, 16, 17 years ago, well, 17 or 18 years ago when I first started out, I didn't understand. I think it's so key is not to hear the words that clients say, but to listen to the condition of the heart. Because sometimes clients can't verbalize what they're actually thinking. So as an example, if we're asking clients to say, yeah, I want to give money to a charity. I want to be able to have the money come back to me as an income stream. I want to do good, but I want to have great tax deductions as well. They don't know how to verbalize that. So part of our job as advisors is to hear what they're saying. More importantly, what they're not saying, but what maybe they mean. And that takes, and I think part of the legacy project is really helping advisors understand that clients will share with you more from what they're not saying than what they are saying, but we just need to listen to some of their facial structure. We need to watch and observe what they're saying. Sometimes if they say, I've been sitting on this board for years, and I really, really love that organization. They're doing such great things in the community. Well, that may be the impetus for saying, well, did you ever think about how you may want to be able to benefit them, but also maybe give some benefits to you and your family? No, how do you do that? And that is open. The ability for us to do that has opened up doors sometimes for not-for-profits for us to say that, and they're like, wow, I can do that with my clients. Yeah, if we can help your clients win, you may be able to win then also. And I just think that when we're talking around doing good from a tax perspective, also from a personal perspective, is hearing what the client's not saying, but they totally mean. They just haven't been able to articulate it yet. I think that's one of the things that you do really well, Rich. And I think as we continue to build out planning, listen for those little subtle cues. Dan, question, comment on that?
Can I just add, and I'm sorry, Dan, just two other practical ways to, I think, address what he's asking is whether it's doing good, however that's manifested, charitably or just impact, how they spend their time, what they focus on as individuals and families, is imagine you as the advisor just facilitating that conversation. You might have to start with the decision makers, but the question is, how would you define, what would good look like if we were able to accomplish it? That's just a way and now imagine if the family was somewhat cohesive and willing to communicate and they were adults, then facilitating that kind of conversation across generations. That would be one way to do it. Another version of that, which we do very regularly, is let's paint a vision, a success vision, just for 5 years out, not 100 years out, maybe 3 years out. What would success look like for this? And you could start with a couple, you could start with an individual, you could start with multiple generations. We've done all of the above. And we literally have them come to the meeting with that pre-work is defining what would success look like, describe it, paint a picture. And one of the families I worked with about a year, maybe 2 years ago, 4 of the 5 family members were all creatives, like in a very traditional sense. The dad was your traditional non-creative who was the wealth creator. So I said, because especially that there was creatives, I said, imagine either you're writing painting the mother in this case was a very effective, a very good painter. Imagine you're painting a picture, or imagine you're writing a script to a film. Tell me what would be what would the characters be doing, or what would the painting look like, or what. Right? So you just speak to their language. You don't have to have any special training for it. But having someone even do that little reflection of, okay, what would success look like? What would the good be? Will help you and help them ultimately in their planning.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, I think this is along the lines, I wanted to ask you a little bit, to dig a little deeper when you talk about alignment and impact and doing good. Before the webinar started, we were touching on the idea of sort of individual legacy versus family legacy. And maybe I'm giving away some of my own bias on this, but I think the two are very different. And if you change the word from legacy to impact, maybe it becomes a little bit more clear, because I think where a lot of the lack of alignment sometimes comes in a family is around individual impact, and what my idea of individual good, what the good that I want to do or I believe in the world needs to be made may differ greatly from my siblings. And so, and certainly in my practice and business, I make that distinction very clear, where you have to allow the individual family members and client to pursue and have their individual impact, to do their individual good, live their individual legacy, right? And in terms of family assets, there's the financial assets in that sense, or really, we talk about wealth transfer. To me, it's less about wealth. My wealth should be used for two things, right? It is for my impact, my social impact on the world. And then in terms of my family, I see that as, how can I propel you forward in achieving your good, in achieving your legacy? And so this idea, I think where a lot of conflict comes in, is that we wrap a lot of that into family legacy. And we get confused because we try to get everyone to agree on what the collective impact on the world should be. But it's not that. It's like the family wealth. The impact of the family wealth should be to propel the individual family members forward towards achieving their own life of fulfillment and purpose, right? Which can differ greatly. While, as the wealth creator, my wealth is applied, and what I have done in my life is for the purposes that I personally feel, that's my impact. And then from a legacy preservation perspective, when I am gone, I want my estate, my legacy, to do two things. I want to continue to serve that purpose that I have lived towards the world, towards my social impact, my cultural impact, right? Whether that was a business I created that, I want to continue forward, or whatever manifestation that took. One goal is to continue my personal impact forward, while ensuring that I empower my children, my future heirs, in a way that propels them forward to find and live their own individual purpose and their own individual legacy. And I feel like, maybe, I don't know if you've seen that, but from obviously from a family dynamics perspective, certainly from a legal and governance perspective, I think this is where a lot of the mistakes are made, because we sort of put the family in control often of, my legacy, when maybe they shouldn't be, because it's confusing my legacy with their individual legacies. I don't know. I throw that out there as an issue that I see is often resolved and unresolved and often problematic.
Yeah. I would like to lead that to our next question, because I think the next question is really important on that. And the next question is, how do I prepare the next generation of my family for opportunities and responsibilities, right? And one of the things is, and I would like to, Rich, I'd like to paint it in this context, because I know you and I believe this, that a person's gift makes room for them, right? And puts them in front of influential people. And I think a lot of the times in family enterprises, family businesses, in the context of family wealth, right? Sometimes we're trying to make someone into something that they're not. And you've probably seen that over the 20, 30 years that you're working with families, is that you take a matriarch or a patriarch of the family, and they want their child to be the CEO of the company, when their child is really a phenomenal rainmaker salesperson, but they're not a CEO of a company. They don't have the giftings and the talent for that, right? So when it comes to preparing the next generation, right, for the responsibilities of wealth and for the opportunities of wealth, right, how does that play out when we're talking around legacy? Like, what do you see around that? And I'd love to start that conversation and then open the mic up to some people who have some comments or questions around that.
A couple of initial thoughts, especially with what Dan shared, and this topic is, if not on this call, worth more time on another call. What I think Dan's highlighting, and the way I would bridge the family legacy and the individual's legacy together, or I'd link them, is, Dan, the way I think about it is, irrespective of what's in one's financial capital, we're all creating legacies. So I think it's not that you're saying otherwise, it's a false choice that either it's a family legacy or it's an individual legacy. I think the bridge that makes it more sophisticated is that when assets are going to be shared, that's when those two worlds have to join. So if I'm a child in a financially successful family, it doesn't matter if I get a penny or $100 million. I still have to live a life that I want to have the impact I want to have. The dynamic comes when, am I going to be contributing and or owning or stewarding assets that are going to be shared or not the ones I've created? That's the dynamic that I think both exist. And this goes maybe to the whole premise of why you guys are doing the Legacy Project and creating this movement, is we are assuming in that kind of language that legacy is only associated with financial assets. It doesn't matter how much you have, you still have a life to impact other people. And the potential is, when you have more assets, financial assets, quote, if done right, you can impact possibly a larger sphere, but they're not mutually exclusive. And I think we're linking them. I think they're linked only when there's some kind of sharing that has to happen, or some stewarding that has to happen.
Richard,
can I give one practical, because I want the advisors on this call to say, well, how do I even gauge that? Let me just give, if it's okay, let me give one. And I did this with a family. It was 2 generations in the room. There was about 20 family members with spouses. And I'm taking this from my family systems training. It's very practical. If you think of a continuum, on one side of the continuum is the word autonomy, meaning a very individual approach to things. On the other side of the continuum is intimacy. It's a very intimate connection between people. Like, we share a lot, we're kind of doing a lot together. And then in the middle is the combination of the two, which is what I think Dan is hitting on, which is, how can I be an individual in the context of intimacy of a family? And I literally put that, this is what you could do, put that continuum up in front of the individual, the couple, or the family you're serving, and say, where would you plot your family? Is your family more on the autonomy side, that people are free to go live where they want, pursue their dreams, and will support it? Or are we on a family's culture side that, no, you got to kind of fit in? You know, you got to fit in if you're really going to kind of weigh in and have impact on either our giving, our business, our assets. And let them plot themselves, and you will set up like I did with this family, a very powerful conversation. And especially when spouse is in the room, you get to hear an outside family perspective on how they would plot their family, who they married into. And that, Dan, may give the advisor a starting point to go, okay, this is a very autonomous based culture. It might be easy for them to say, you know what, whatever my son or daughter wants to do, opera singer, it doesn't matter, doesn't want to go for an MBA, we're going to support that. But not all families are there. And I think that would be a practical way to gauge that. Go ahead.
Rich, I'm thinking many years ago, a family that you and I had sat down with, and when we were sitting down with them, if you remember correctly, it was the second and third generation, and the third generation was like, I think so let me give context to it. It's three generation family business, and we had two people from generation 2 there and one person from generation 3 there, and grandfather is still alive, and the founder of it was still alive, and generation 3 was saying, I believe that we could turn this into $1 billion family business at some point. And generation 2 is saying, well, we can't do that because we're going to be risking everything that grandpa built and we're stewarding. And I think, to your point, Rich, when we're talking about the pendulum, right, or the spectrum, we had one side of it was stewarding what generation 1 built. One side of it was, let's build something really creative. And to your point, and what we said in the meeting is, maybe instead of looking at ourselves as a family business, we look at ourselves as a family enterprise. And a family enterprise can take on some of those other ventures and allow generation 3, to your point, Dan, allow generation 3 to be able to take $1 million, $2 million, $3 million and go into a venture and really prepare them. If they fail, great, what did we learn from it? But it doesn't put the whole family enterprise at risk, right? And if they learn, well, then and they win, then it propels that whole family to get to that next level, right, of wealth, but also allows generation 3 to find their purpose within the greater scheme of the family enterprise. And I think as an advisor, that's kind of a very difficult position, because you may be serving generation 2. And generation 2, you may have to open up their eyes to say, well, how do we allow generation 3 to be generation 3, to live out the gifts, the passions, the purpose, and not put everything that the family has worked, their whole life for at risk, but allow them to grow into becoming a voice that can be heard because they have a track record to be proven. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there and just kind of get your thoughts on that, and then open up the line to anyone around preparing the next generation.
Can I jump in on that? Just quickly. I mean, this is where I think, on some sense, there's a right answer. There's a best answer to this question. And in my view, when you talk about stewardship, I think one of the big problems in terms of how traditional estate planning and wealth transfer is done is that we force the stewardship onto other family members. And by doing that, we inhibit the ability for individual family members to find their own calling or purpose. It is one thing for me to come to the conclusion that my purpose is to steward my father's legacy. That's fine. But when you force the stewardship, that is a great responsibility. And the reality is, I don't have enough time and energy to do both. If I'm stewarding your legacy, I'm naturally taking away from my own, if my own legacy is not to steward yours. And so from a governance perspective and from a wealth transfer perspective, I think we need to start thinking out of the box in terms of what do we do with the individual's legacy, and how do we allow for the flexibility of future generations to be integrated into the stewardship, but minimize that necessary involvement and maybe involve professionals or other people, right? There's ways of doing this where I can, I mean, it's like business succession planning, right? If I'm the CEO of my family, in a sense, well, I need to train and find my successor. That's not necessarily going to be my son or daughter. And so, that can be somebody from the outside world where I can instill in them all of my values and everything else. And in fact, probably almost from an easier way, because they're objective and not tied into the family dynamic. But I think that forced stewardship is problematic, and I would say not just problematic, one of the biggest problems that we face in terms of how we do planning, and one of the fundamental things we need to reconsider from an advisory perspective. More often than not, I think it is a bad idea for the family to be involved in the stewardship of those family assets when they are what I would call legacy assets. And I want to distinguish that between non-legacy assets. Non-legacy assets have zero legacy value, right? So, and we can get into what that means, but when we're talking about legacy, things that reflect my life, my purpose, my impact on the world, those assets, more often than not, should not be forced on my heirs.
Yeah. You know what? I think about this, Rich and Dan. There's been so many studies that have basically said that the two major reasons for wealth not making it across generations, these are the studies that all of us have heard, right? Is breakdown in communication and trust is the main one, and then failure to prepare the next generation is the second, right? And when I think about that, I think a lot of it starts with communication, because my wife and I say this all the time at our coaching company. We say, what happens first is communication breaks. When communication breaks, right, then what happens? Trust then eventually breaks. So whenever you see a family working through some of these issues, if we don't have the ability to communicate through these issues, we're never going to have the trust to work through it. So I think part of this is the family being able to effectively communicate. And Rich, I think when it comes to legacy, and when it comes to some of the work that you guys do with families, I think it's all around how do we effectively communicate so that we can have the trust that we're going to need to work through some of these difficult conversations. These are not easy conversations. These are not conversations that everyone has. They're just so simple. And at the dinner table, well, let's just talk about our differences. I don't think that happens every night at a dinner table with these families, right? But how do we get to a point where our communication is good enough that we can have difficult conversations for breakthrough?
And I think it starts with, maybe I'm going to echo a bit of the sentiment of Dan here, is that I think sometimes it has to start with even helping the individual get clear on what they do want, and then therefore how to communicate it. That we might be making too many assumptions that in some of our clients who are very busy creating or just busy with life, they might not, like you said earlier, they might not have yet the language, let alone the clarity of what they really are trying to accomplish. And I think that's the point of our larger conversation here, is just helping all of us help our clients care about what they care about. And that takes time to go beyond and open up the obvious. And I don't mean open up like become psychologists. It's just what we're talking about on this call is how do we help them get clear on what they really want in life, not in death, in life. And that'll help them feel more confident and obviously value you, the advisor, and helping them get there. And it isn't about becoming the psychologist. It's about just helping them, building off of you, Chad, here, is helping them get clear and then helping them communicate that clarity with courage. But the more they're clear on it, and the more that what kind of Dan's highlighting is part of the process an advisor brings is maybe an educational process. And so I think, Dan, my opinion is you're painting the aspirational picture that in an ideal world, based on what was covered on the last call, what contributes to one's happiness or flourishing is not taking on the burden of what you don't want to take on from someone else's life. But some families start there, and we might need to help them get closer to, that I'm helping a family as we speak now, and it's related but not bullseye here. And an executive created very, very meaningful wealth, and now he wants to go help extended family. So the amazing love that was coming out of their hearts, like, I want to go now do this for my nieces and nephews, I want to do this for my siblings. And I felt like I was putting a wet blanket on the conversation. I was going, okay, let's just think that through. You're about to potentially make someone's kids wealthier than their parents. You're coming in from a good motivation, but you might unintentionally hurt a relationship. And just helping them think through, okay, I know you're coming from a good place, in this case, this specific example. Well, let's imagine that you're now going to make some family or kid wealthier than their parents are because you're just trying to help. What's that? Is that the goal? And so I'll just give you the punchline here is I help them reframe that approach to going to their, in this case, siblings, and saying, we whatever the script is, but basically we've been fortunate enough to create some ability to help other people. And we want to help you and your kids. And here's what we're thinking. What do you think? That would be more of a Dan's point, that's how you do it without just saying, I want to help you. Just thinking, if he just would have went with what they were trying to do, it could have caused more unintentional conflict or confusion.
Can I speak to that for a moment? So we talk about unintended consequences. And I think a lot of the times, at least in 17, 18 years I've been dealing with families, I've seen a lot of unintended consequences. And when I look at some of these families that have built some significant wealth, right? I think they've built some of this, at least what I've seen, they've built some of this wealth out of pure fear of lack, right? So I've seen my family struggle and I'm not going to have that. So they built a business out of pure lack and pure fear, and it's wildly successful, right? But that doesn't allow for generational success, because what motivated that person was to get out of that situation that they were in potentially, right? But now when we're talking about the next generation around legacy, we may have an unintended consequence because for 40 years we have built it this way, right? So we've raised a child up. Let's use an example of a child. We've raised this child for 40 years one way. And now we're saying, well, how we raised you was maybe not accurate. And maybe there's a better way of raising you. But it doesn't mean that we can't just unwind immediately all the impact, whether positive or negative, that's occurred to that child. Well, it's the same thing as we're growing and preparing the next generation. I think a lot of these businesses that I've seen have seen success, but they've never gotten to significance. Because significance requires a different way of processing, a different way of thinking. I know success is a lot easier when, no matter who you speak to, success is a lot easier than significance, because success is predicated on you working hard and getting some other people to buy in. Significance is really through a thought process around that, and then an intentionality or an intentional governance around that. And I think for the advisors that are on this call, we have to understand, are we trying to get our clients just to have more financial success, or are we trying to get them to a level now of significance? And one of the things that Danielle and I have really taken on it in our personal lives, and Rich, I know you do that as well, and I've seen it also in Dan's life, is not giving those that we love everything so that they don't need anything. And how do we encourage them, and how do we prepare them? And sometimes preparing them is not giving them everything. It's making them work and incentivizing them to succeed. And I even think of what John says a lot of the times. He said that listen, anyone that's on this call, I'd encourage you to go back and just look at his YouTube page, because he has these lessons that his dad's taught him, 29 lessons. And one of the things that he said, and this is legacy, he said this, Rich and Dan, he said that my dad did not pay me to take out garbage or clean or do chores. My dad paid me to read books. That's a legacy. You fast forward 60 years. The guy is who he is today because his dad paid him to read books and not to do chores. Not saying that doing chores is not important. All I'm saying is that when we align our values with our dollars, we get legacy. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, by the way, I just want to be sensitive to the fact that where we are in time, if there's any, I'd like to get people weighing, we would all like to have people weighing in here. So if we want to just make sure.
Yep. I don't see any questions right now. That's why I've been looking. When you see me with my head down a little bit, I'm looking to see if any questions are open or if I received a text from the office about questions. So anyone who has any questions or would love to jump in, we'd love to open up your mic. But at this point, we're going to continue with the conversation until we see that.
That's not a question, that sound? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, we haven't really.
I'm sorry, Rich, you have a question. Someone just opened up their, put a question. You want to continue your conversation? You want to share? Or
No. Go ahead. No. I'd rather them weigh in, please.
Yeah, Jim, you have a question. Why don't we opened up your mic? Can you hear us?
Well, yeah, what I put up there, I just was commenting, this discussion is so good and so rich. I don't have a question. I just so appreciate what you're sharing. I want to go back and process this some more after this webinar. It's just so powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. You know, Jim, people like yourself and Steve and all of the, what you guys do is so powerful. And I'm really excited next month to have the CEO of your organization jump on and talk about how important trustee services are to fulfilling someone's purpose. It's going to be really a great conversation to have Steve Markin and Judy Pearson on that call. But Jim, I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that we were trying to get to question 3, which is how do we prepare the next generation, and we're hitting on it. But there's a number of other things I want to say about that question. But one is, and you just kind of was the catalyst for it, Chad, is asking the question when the question's related to preparing that next generation, or what some people call the rising generation, is asking the question first is, what are we preparing them for? Right? The assumption, the default again, which is why I love what you and Dan are doing here, is as important as it is the financial capital. Again, I want to echo, I've done it and continue to do it for my children. But the assumption is that because there's a significant amount of financial assets, then they must be prepared for financial assets. But to Dan's point, what if that's not the goal of the next generation? So the question has to begin with, what are we preparing them for? Using the Maxwell anecdote, well, in part, it was, I guess, to expose their children to learning and other world views. I don't know what the angle was, but it was at least learning, right? Reading, learning. So I think it's important because depending on how you answer that, so let's just say my answer as a parent might be, I want to prepare responsible and impactful citizens. Well, that's a different question than I hope to prepare my children to run our family office. Now, you could have impact being the head of the family office, but that's not necessarily the same answer. Or I'm preparing my children to follow whatever passion or dreams they have, right? How you answer the question as the parent or grandparent will shape what we're talking about and how to answer the question, what are we preparing them for, and how to prepare them.
Yeah. This is awesome. I just want to see, let me just take a look to see if there's anyone else who had any questions, because I want to start wrapping up. We're coming to that point. We're about 75 minutes in. I guess any key takeaways, Rich, from you, and then I want to hand it over to Dan, just to kind of get some feedback from the legal lens of what his thoughts were on today's conversation.
I would just say that these are what I think maybe what Jim just who took the mic just echoed for all of us, is that all we're doing here together is just opening up the lens and speaking about kind of the human journey, not just the financial journey. And once you do that, it completely revolutionizes in a positive way what's going to happen in the advisor-client relationship. and therefore help in the planning and in the investing and everything else. And I'll close with, that's really our mission as advisors, even though I'm not the kind of advisor many people on this call are, is to help our clients live their legacy. And living their legacy is the work of the work. So thanks for having me be part of this.
Awesome, Rich. Well, I'm gonna close my mic. Dan, I'd love to just kind of have you share a little bit from the legal lens, and then I'll jump back in and we'll wrap up for today.
Sure. I mean, I think from the legal perspective, I want to come back to the importance of the 5 capitals and what we think about when we put together legal structures and legal vehicles, and what those are intended to own, to steward, to protect. I think traditionally we think of trusts and companies and other legal structures as protecting those financial assets again, and to start to understand that wealth, financial wealth, those sorts of traditional assets is but a small percentage of the wealth of an individual and of a family, that we need to start thinking about how to embody those other types of capitals, that other type of wealth into our legal structures. And from an estate attorney perspective, in the past, I've had some conversations around legacy and some of these, what I think are framed as softer issues. I actually think that they are the harder issues to deal with, but these softer issues, and certainly, there's a number of, there would be a certain response in the legal industry that that's not the responsibility of the lawyer to speak to some of those, the family values and things. And I would just challenge that. I think that while it is not our responsibility to make up our clients' minds per se, it is our responsibility to create legal structures and legal vehicles that can holistically embody, protect, and preserve the totality of their wealth, their legacy, which is to speak to the human and the intellectual. And there are ways of doing that. And I think from a governance perspective, drawing the distinction between individual wealth and legacy from family wealth and legacy is important. And if you think about using companies as an example is just a good tool. I mean, I usually use Apple as an example because it's such a well-known brand. But it's very clear, if Apple were a privately owned company, which it's not, but if Steve Jobs was the sole owner when he was alive of Apple, what Apple represents, there are clear values, there's a clear identity to that brand that reflects his individual legacy, his individual impact on the world. Right? Apple stands for innovation. It stands for disruption. There are things built into there that he, that are core beliefs, core values, core perceptions, core everything of the founder, of the wealth creator in this instance, that are infused into that company. And if you think of that in terms of a legacy asset, handing that over, the stewardship of that asset, which is a legacy asset, it's very clear to see how that should not necessarily be the responsibility of my children, who may or may not agree or understand what that asset stands for, what my legacy as it is manifested in that asset stands for. So that's just my general remarks on the legal, is to really start to think of legal vehicles, whether they be trusts or companies, as capable of protecting, harnessing, and representing all of the forms of wealth and capitals, and to start thinking creatively about how do we build that in. And going back to the company example, how does a company like Apple maintain its identity, its values, right? That's done through corporate charters and meetings, et cetera, but that identity is kept and contained and expanded on. And the right people are chosen to speak to and represent those values. Again, whereas if my daughter thought technology was an evil, why should she take over Apple, right? If Apple was my legacy. Now, and that's to distinguish between the financial aspects of that company and the legacy aspects of that company in terms of values and the other types of capitals. So that's my 2 cents. I feel like there's a lot more to say, but we're limited in time. And I'll turn it back over to Chad, and I'm open to questions. I hope that made some sense. I'm trying to respond to a lot of things that were said.
Well, thank you. That was good. So in wrapping, our next conversation, and Dan, you spoke about this, is how important it is to make sure that the structures that we set up are set up correctly to manage the legacy, right? And part of that is trustee services. So next month we're going to have a conversation around trustee services and how important it is to align a trustee services with a family's legacy. I've seen it over the last 18 years or so that a lot of families put in family members as trustees to steward, in essence, the vision of the wealth creator. But if the trustee is not doing it in an effective manner or doesn't understand their responsibilities, how does that impact that family's legacy? So we're going to have a conversation around trustee services, legacy, and how the two merge and come together. We're looking forward to it. We have 2 of our friends in our community, Steve Markin and Judy Pearson, who are going to be joining us for that conversation. So just remember this, that the next month's one is not on a Thursday. Next month is on a Wednesday. So it's August 19th, on Wednesday, August 19th at 12 p.m. Excited to have you join us for our next conversation. Invite people that are in your community, in your advisory circle to join us, to continue this conversation, to get momentum on this conversation. Excited that you would spend time with us and take the time that you have the last 75, 80 minutes to invest with us. I hope that you found it to be fruitful. We're looking forward to you joining us on the 19th. And Richard Orlando, thank you again, my friend, for all the time that you put into serving families. We appreciate you. And those of you who asked some questions, we will surely be getting you, or have comments, we surely will be getting you his ebook. And can't encourage you more. You see it on the screen. Buy a copy of his book. Share it with advisors that you work with or families that you serve. I think it'll be a tremendous blessing to them. But excited for Richard to have you with us. Thank you for your time, my friend.
Thank you, guys.
We will see all of you again on August 19th. That's Wednesday, August 19th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, be safe and continue to serve families well. God bless you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.